All right, let's roll. Hey, everybody, this is Wayne Pignole. I am up in not so sunny Sandpoint, Idaho, which I think many of you know. I think it's worth just telling you a little bit of how we got here. I woke up like 3 or 4 weeks ago in the morning, I really want to go sailing, realized it probably wasn't going to happen anytime soon, and thought, what is the next best thing? And I decided it was talking about sailing. So I started thinking about who I'd want to talk to about sailing, and I went kind of list, and I said a whole lot of people. And under the category of things, be careful what you wish for, decided to have a webinar, and here we are. And what I was just joking about is thought it would be relatively simple to pull together, actually turned into a bunch of work. But I got to tell you, there's work you don't want to do and work that's really fun, and this was really fun. And we'll get into more of that really soon. So first things first, this obviously is part of the Nationals. I have volunteered to help lead or organize the post-race debriefs and the clinic. And as part of that, we decided that we would extend this out and have this webinar and be just to kind of tie into that. And we wanted to do a series of 2 or 3 of these. So this being the first one. If you don't already know, we currently have 125 boats registered, right? This is, again, the 75th anniversary, and they're going to have the big, even if you're not going to sail Nationals, there's a 75th anniversary race and gala on Sunday, which you can register for separately. And all the details for that are available at thistlenationals2020.com if you haven't already checked it out. I imagine lots of people on this webinar have already registered, although it's not just for people going to Nationals. A couple of shout outs to sponsors who help make it so we can go sailing at the regatta is Key Bank, which is, I think a lot of people who know they are a big bank started in Cleveland, and also Roundstone Roundtable. Roundstone is probably a name not many people know, but they are a self-funded captive insurance organization headquartered in Cleveland that provides employer-sponsored health benefit plans with long-term savings for small to mid-sized businesses. And again, they have made a fairly significant donation to help support the Nationals. So shout out to them for doing that. Next thing, just a little bit of few community rules, okay? So the first one is, and I think some or most of you came in on mute, so with your video on, I'm gonna actually ask you to turn your video off. So if you go to the lower left-hand corner and shut it down, and all we're trying to do is make sure that we don't have any bandwidth issues. We are going to be showing a bunch of videos and pictures, and things will slow down if we don't do it. The other is if you can mute yourself, same right next to it, just make sure that you're on mute. That would be great. See a lot of you doing that. If you are on a phone, which hopefully you can actually figure out a way to get in front of a screen, because again, there's going to be a lot of pictures and videos. But if you are on a phone, phone, just hit *6.
Hey, Wayne, this is Mike here. I just hope not to interrupt you here, but I believe there's a bunch of people in the waiting room right now.
Are there? Okay.
So maybe you can let them in and continue on.
Done.
Yeah, that's better.
Everyone got it, yeah. Thank you, Mike. All right, just coming in. Yeah, if you just joined us, if you can just make sure that you stop your video, lower left-hand corner, and mute yourself so that we maximize our bandwidth, that would be great. Okay. The other thing, just so you know, we are going to use the chat room. It is currently disabled. In a couple minutes, we'll open it up. And there's 2 ways you can use it. One is you can use it to chat with each other individually. And if you want to do that, go for it. The other way we can use it is for everybody. I would ask you to reserve that for questions that you have. Okay. And if you would minimize the, hey, shout out to everybody ones, if you could do that for us, that would be super cool. And again, what we're going to do is use those questions. And if we have time, we'll answer some at the end. And if not, we're thinking of using those for a whole nother webinar where we just go through and answer the questions. So again, we'll turn that on a little bit and I'll let you know that it's on. A couple other things, if you can go ahead and if you go on your picture and there's 3 little dots in the upper right-hand corner, if you want to rename yourself so we know who you are, that would be super cool. Maybe you want to go incognito, that's fine too. Okay. And then the last thing is this is being recorded and we're doing that so we can see how we did. And the other thing is to come back for anybody who's missed it, that they can watch it. Okay, I think that's all the rules. Moving on. Oops, Mike, there we go. Okay. With us today is current class president Tom Hubble and former president of U.S. Sailing. I think many of you know Tom. He obviously has done a huge amount to help with the education of all of us as sailors through Coach TCA. He is also here to talk and give us a quick update on nationals and COVID-19, and then also about the current situation on a non-quota year qualification. So Tom, all yours.
Great. Thanks, Wayne. How's my volume?
Good.
You got me okay?
I can.
First of all, thanks a lot, Wayne, for pulling this together, and for all of our distinguished coaches online here. This is really a totally cool idea, and I'm so glad you're doing it. So everybody's watching the news all day, every day, because that's all there is to do. And so I'm sure you know that things are getting better, but the barriers have not been lifted, so we're still waiting. I'm optimistic. I think it'll be a little close, but I think we're going to be all right as far as having the nationals. Time will tell. The other issue is what to do about qualifications, since so many districts are canceled, and so the governing board has addressed this online and made a recommendation or a ruling, which is an amendment to the bylaws. Wayne, if you pull that up. So basically, if the skipper sails the districts, it's not a problem, that you're qualified. If you can't sail the districts because there isn't one, or your sister-in-law got married, or your whatever, then one of these alternatives should work. First of all, if you're a junior, all you got to do is show up and sail either the junior nationals or the women's nationals, and you're qualified. If you're not a junior, you've got to find 2 regattas since January of 2019. So if you did districts and nationals, you're good. If you did a fall regatta and maybe you get one this spring, you're good. Or you can sail 3 fleet race days in the last 2 years. In other words, it's a pretty low bar, and anybody who's got a boat who's been out sailing ought to be able to qualify. And then the last item is, if you didn't sail districts, but you did one of these other things, you need to notify your district governor and the first vice president that you did that. That's the whole story. After 2020, this bylaw amendment goes away, and we go back to what's printed in the book. So there you have it.
Okay. All right, thanks. And again, if anybody has questions about that, you'll have an opportunity when we turn the chat room on to put them in. Okay? Thanks again, Tom.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. First of all, I'm going to turn this over pretty soon to the main attraction. I just want to introduce our panel, not that many of them need a whole lot of introduction. The first is Greg Griffin, our current national champion, and depending on what happens this year, maybe for the next few years, right? National champion, and also Midwinter's West champion, Greg Griffin. And not only that, someone who has really, I know, helps lots of people sail these boats faster. Mike Ingham, and as another one who's done a huge amount to help the class and everybody sail faster, is also a 9-time national champion, and just continues to be a great teacher. The third person, Matt Fisher. Some of you may not know Matt did grow up when he was young sailing Thistles. His father was a Lightning sailor, so then he ended up sailing mostly Lightnings. He is a 3-time college All-American, a Pan Am gold medalist, Lightning North American champion, and a Lightning world champion. And about 4 or 5 years ago, and I've known Matt and his brother Greg for pretty much my whole sailing life, we started sailing together. He bought a boat. He won Midwinter's East last year and has been going up the curve. And why he's great to have on this panel is because I think he brings the perspective of someone who's a good sailor that had to figure out how to sail these boats. And then last, Matt's brothers, Greg, is a 25-time national champion, 5-time Thistle champion, really all around good guy and super generous with his time. And he is the moderator of this whole fiesta. Greg, it's all yours.
Wayno, thanks a lot. And first, thanks to you, Wayne, for all your efforts in putting this thing together and making it happen. And I am honored to be included in this webinar and be working with these guys, with Matt, Greg, and Mike, and bringing all this information to you guys. They've got a lot of great stuff to share. But it's great to be back with the Thistle class. I really have missed you all, and I really look forward to seeing you all at the Nationals. You know, before we get started, I want to say I've been really fortunate to have sailed with all four of these guys at some point in my sailing career. And I say fortunate because I've learned a lot from them. We've been through a lot together, and we've always had a great time. But since I don't know exactly how they would respond to that great time comment, I'm going to move along real quickly and not give them a chance to respond. But so in tonight's webinar, Mike, Greg, and Matt are going to take you through all the important aspects of what makes a Thistle perform upwind. They're going to label those areas that are most important, and what I think is going to be really cool is talk about those areas that aren't critical. And for this first part, when we talk about tuning on land, you know, before we put in the water and get the boat in the water and get going, we're going to assume that everybody has taken the time with their tape measure, with their tuning guide in hand, to set their boat up as close as they can to the tuning guide for their sails. And that's really important. And if you have any questions, I really urge you to reach out to your sailmaker. That's their job. And as you know, they're always happy to help you out, as are any of the top sailors in the Thistle class. And obviously that's what makes this class so special, is the way these kind of things and what you guys do at the midwinters and all that, you know, makes it helpful for everybody to learn as we go along. But this tuning section, we're hoping to talk through in about 20 minutes or so. And frankly, we don't think it deserves much more time than that, because we don't want to get too carried away with it. And then after this tuning discussion, we're going to delve into the upwind trimming technique and teamwork that these guys go through. And this is for sure the truly most important part. We'll not only hear what they feel makes a difference, we'll see as they use some great video to underscore those key points. I think you're going to see that's pretty cool. And in the videos, they're just going to kind of have a running commentary of those things that really matter the most. And finally, tonight's focus, as you know, and as Wayne has said earlier, is all about upwind sailing. We're going to talk some flat water, some choppy water, and all that. But as Wayne pointed out, we hope there's enough questions, and we urge you to ask a pile of them, that we may need to have a follow-up question and answer webinar, and then maybe one that follow after that with downwind and crew work. We think that's going to be really, really important. So thanks, Wayno. So hold on here. Oh, we're right into that one. There we go. No, so I apologize, everybody. I have my notes because I don't want to forget anything. But anyway, this is a really cool shot of Greg winning the Nationals last year in Sandpoint. First, congrats to the Griffin team, and congrats to Wayno for running a great regatta. Super event. But this picture is really telling, because hopefully you can see things like overbend wrinkles, you know, coming back from the mast towards the windows just above the boom. We're going to talk a lot about that kind of stuff. And this picture kind of shows a lot of the great tips and techniques we'll talk about later. And but certainly this moment is the result of all the great preparation that Greg and his team put together, both on and off the water, and what really matters all the way around the race course. And I think that's a really important point that you'll see these guys talking about. There are things that really matter and things that we can get by with not being perfect. But as we look at this, you know, we certainly can appreciate what this emotion must feel like when it all comes together and you win the regatta. All right, so these guys worked hard on this slide. Frankly, there's a lot of discussion about it, and the goal was to try to keep it as short and sweet as they could and just outline the steps that they go through in setting the boat up with the mast down, then when the mast is up, and get through it and make sure that they got the important stuff together. They're going to describe what is key, and what they're looking for, and frankly, again, maybe what's not so important. Okay.
Okay.
Matt, you're going to talk a little bit about diamond tension before we put the mast up and what you're looking for.
Yeah, a couple things on this slide. We first wanted everybody to remember what Greg looked like when he was sailing thistles. But also, we have gotten to the point when I've been sailing these boats the last 4 years where we check our rig tension, the diamond tension, the shroud tension every time we set up the boat. And what Greg's doing right now is looking right down the mast to make sure that it's straight. And we try to make it straight, even if that means having one diamond be a little bit tighter than the other, because that's so important. But we're not going to get into numbers tonight, but follow your tuning guide, as Greg just said. And also in your tuning guide, a lot of times it'll have what weight you would have to match the diamond tension you have, especially for that upper diamond. But I think that one of the coolest things about the Thistle class that I can say is just what I'll call the parking lot culture. And that is that everybody in the class is very approachable. It's a good example of Midwinters East at the Nationals. I'm sure at Midwinters West it was the same. A lot of the leaders in the class put on these coaching sessions, but even in the informal setting of walking over to someone, everybody's very eager to answer questions. So that's why we're here, but that's what goes on in the Thistle class.
That's cool, Matt. That's great. Greg, we were going to ask you about the guide on setting the jib off the middle spreader. Can you, and this is a good time to talk about that before the mast is up. Can you mention that?
You're talking about the little tickler off the middle?
Yeah, the straw thing there.
Yeah, I think
or whatever you use. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't do that, but I know that most people will set those at 10.5 inches. And then that gives you a way to reference when you're looking through that main window at the leach of the jib, and be able to see how far you're off of the mast and be able to relate that back to your tuning guide recommendations. But those need to be on before you put the rig up, obviously, and they go on the middle diamonds. The
Cool.
spreaders, rather, middle spreaders.
Yeah, cool. Okay, Greg, while we're with you, now the mast is up. What are the things you look for to make sure you got it set right out of the box as close as you want it?
So we're going to go ahead and throw the high field lever on and tension up the rig. And then the first thing we're going to do is take that lose gauge and go to the forestay and check that number. And that's something we've really dialed in. That's going to be one of those things we want to see come in right at a certain number, because we've done all of the things we're going to talk about in the coming slides to set up our pre-bend and all of that so that the mast behaves properly.
Okay, cool.
After we check that tension on the forestay, then we're going to come back to the rake, and measure down to the top of the tiller hole, where we're looking for a range. And that range is going to come in usually in about within 3 inches in all the different tuning guides. And we're not so worried about that nailing down a specific number, but we just want to be between that range somewhere.
Okay, great. Mike, we were going to touch on that too. Is there a range that you look at, and the rig tension range, and what is most important to you, or what would you accept as close enough?
Yeah, I'm most important. We're going to talk a lot about how the mast fits on the mast step and the shims and all that. And the critical thing to making all that work is the forestay tension. So what you'll find is this will be an iterative process. You got to put on the forestay tension and get it right, and then check your rake. And in the end, I care if I'm maybe 1 inch or so, maybe even a little more, one way or the other in the number. So you see it's on here at 27.1 in this picture. If that was the number you're looking for, then 27 would be okay. 27.2 would be okay. More important to get the forestay accurate than the rake here.
That's great. I think that's a real important point to make, you guys. That sometimes we get carried away trying to be exactly spot on, and the things we're going to talk about here later would mean the most. But both you guys have kind of indicated the rig tension is something you want to be pretty close, and the rake is close enough. That's good.
Yeah, Greg, we really care that the forestay is correct, spot on, and this doesn't have to be spot on. But I would say that it is important that it's not raked too far back that you can two block and run out of main sheet range. You still got to be able to trim all the way. So if there's ever a condition where you feel like you should be able to trim more, but you can't because you're two blocking, you're too far back. So that really is the thing that matters most. with the rake.
Great, great. Okay, while the main halyard's up and it's hanging down from the top of the mast, Matt, let's talk a little bit about checking the side to side, centering the rig in the boat.
Yeah, this is actually easy, but again, we do this every time we set the mast up. It's just once you're done checking the rake, you walk over to one side, you get a number, which I don't know what that number is, but as you can see right here, it's 24.9½. You walk over to the other side and then try to line up so it's exactly even. Takes less than a minute to check, but it's key to have the mast pointed straight up.
Great. Okay, Wayne, there we go.
Got it.
So Greg, let's get into the mast bend, because we've already kind of intimated that that is the crux of all the tuning discussion we're going to really focus on. So let's talk about it and specifically start the discussion on how we control it.
Yeah, you can see this is a step that is shaved and no shims in it, but you're going to see it has good flexibility. And that's going to be something we're concerned about, making sure it's got freedom to bend. And that's going to allow us to get the mast to shape the mainsail so that we can take not only the boat through the so-called gears that we go through as we're coming out of a tack or we're accelerating from a start, but it's also going to allow us to manipulate the mast in the different conditions we're going to sail in, both wind conditions and, just as importantly, the water conditions. So one thing you can run into, I've got a step and a butt here, actually, Wayne, if you can spotlight it.
I don't think I can.
So if it doesn't bend freely, you may find that the butt where it sits on the step is not rocking easily. And this part of the butt here, the, hole, as it sits down on the step, you want to be sure that it doesn't bind on either side of the step here. So you may have to work the edge of that to make sure it bends and can flex freely. So this is what we're looking for on that freely bending, so that the butt can rock inside the step very easily.
Great. It's cool you just happen to have one of those sitting on your desk. So, Mike, Greg mentioned shims and their effect on mast bend. So what do you look for there in setting the mast up and to encourage or restrict bend? Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, so the picture, the video there that Greg was referring to had no shims, and it still had some motion in there. So each of these sails are cut with different amounts of luff curve, and therefore need different amounts of bend in the mast when you're setting up. Call that pre-bend. And when we're setting up on shore, the initial thing to do is go with what your tuning guide says and try to get that tuning, the pre-bend. So I set up mine to 1 1/4 inches. And I ended up doing that with a combination of it's a compression bend, right? Like, so the back of the mast is levered and that lever arm makes the mast bend. And I need to start off on shore with the predetermined amount. And I'll do that with a combination of forestay and shims. So for example, if the forestay is supposed to be at 24, with the pro gauge, and I only get 1 inch of pre-bend, I'll actually go up a little bit on the forestay to make that happen. But then you see here in these two pictures, on the left picture, there's shims in the back, and that'll bend it more. And on the right picture, that'll keep it from bending too much. And we use these shims in 2 ways, and the forestay in 2 ways. One is the initial setup, but the other is to power or depower on the water. And the basics of that is a straight mast is more powerful sail because it's using the luff curve on a straight mast to push the shape in the sail, and a depowered sail is a bent mast. And so shims behind will cause a mast to bend, shims in front will keep it from bending too much.
Gotcha. So Mike, if you're having a hard time getting your mast to bend, would you just pile 15 shims underneath the back edge, or is there some limit or restriction there?
Yeah, well, the short answer is you do want to, this is the time you're allowed to deviate from the tuning guide a little bit. It's a starting point, but if you're not getting enough bend because maybe you have a stiff mast, and there are some stiff masts out there, or you put some shims behind or tighten the forestay a little bit. And then if you have a flexible mast, maybe you take some out to get that pre-bend. But there is a limit, you're right. So you're allowed by class rules to put shims in, but you're only allowed 3/16 total. I find that the tangs that you see in these pictures, I'm pretty sure are probably just the tangs off an old broken mast. They're exactly the right thickness. They're 1/16 each. So I use 3 different shims of a 1/16 and can stack them up 1, 2, or 3 to that max of 3/16.
Great. So Matt, this is something that you really, you spent a lot of time with learning to adjust and master, if you will. And so once you learned it, what's the goal that you're looking for with the proper shims and the proper mast bend?
Yeah, this is a great shot of John Baker's main, and this is what we're really trying to achieve with what Greg and Mike have talked about the last couple minutes, and that's that bend that you see down low in the bottom, I'll say, third of the mast, and what it does is flatten out that bottom third of the main. But if I can leave you with anything, it's that my steepest learning curve was getting this pre-bend down low. We are one of the boats that has a stiff mast, and it took 3 shims, and I didn't get the 3rd shim in until the last half of Westport 2 years ago. So it took us a while to figure out why we weren't getting enough pre-bend wrinkles. But again, this is what we're trying to achieve, is getting this bend down low so you can flatten out the main in that lower 3rd section.
Hey, Matt, I'd like to add to that, there are some stiffer masts like yours, and there's some more flexible ones. And I think they all can be perfectly competitive. So there's nothing wrong with a flexi mast or a stiff mast. You just need to change how you shim it to make it bend.
Absolutely. To your point, Mike, we would walk around the parking lot and see boats with similar sails to ours with just 1 or 2 shims getting plenty of wrinkles. So it was just something that we had to make a change for our boat.
And you guys are going to point out what those guides are when it's all said and done, what you're really looking for to make sure you got it right. And hey, Greg, so we've mentioned now a couple times pre-bend. Mike mentioned 1 1/4. Talk about, before you leave the dock, how you know you got your shims right on land, like Mike mentioned, and what you use to get there.
Yeah, so there's a card that we use to slide up. There it is. And you can put this in the mast track and get it up about halfway, almost right even with that middle spreader is the max depth when you tension the rig on the boat. And we're just going to pull the main halyard down from the sheave at the top and pull it tight straight to the gooseneck, and then sight from the side and try and get in that range that our tuning guide's specifying. So this gives us a good way to get a scientific reading rather than just eyeballing. And that's going to set the main up. And when we get out into the lighter air and we can't bend the mast with the main sheet, it's going to set us up for that condition and moving up through the range.
Cool. So while you got the main halyard up, can you go to the next one, Wayno? While you got the main halyard up, we spent the time on shore making sure the mast is straight by adjusting the diamonds to get the mast as straight as we could make it. Now we put it up on the boat. We've got it tensioned. We've got the rake right. We've got the shims in it. And you mentioned that this is interesting. You mentioned you take a look up the mast to make sure it's straight at this point. So touch on that and what you're looking for, and sometimes maybe what you need to do to take care of it.
Yeah, so this is kind of the final check, the sanity check here, to make sure that while we knew the mast was straight when we looked at it without tension, now we have it tension, and there are other factors that could impact that. So in the photo on the right, the main halyard is coming straight down the track, and that is a perfectly straight mast. That's what we're looking for. Occasionally you'll find something like the left photo, where you can see the main halyard is off to the side and the top is being forced off to the side up at the very top, and that's being caused by an untrue mast butt, more than likely. And I did this just by putting a shim in on one side, and you can see the impact it has. So if you were in a hurry, say you're at a regatta and you came across this and you've got to get out to the race course, you might get some thin material and try and shim the other side to even it up until you have enough time to spend some time with a file on the butt and get the two sides of the butt, we'll call them the cheeks, get those lined up nice and true so that the mast straightens out.
Perfect. Perfect. Anything you guys want to add to that?
No, I think you said it perfectly.
Okay. How about the next one, Wayno? So we're going to leave the tuning on land part. We're going to get on the water. And this is where it really happens. This is the important stuff. And these guys are going to talk about these key points that they've laid out on the left of this slide. And what's going to really be cool is there's going to be pictures and videos that will highlight these points. So we'll let you look at these here for a sec before we move on. Okay. And Mike, now we're on the water. We're really going to put into practice the things you guys have been talking about, mast bend, and that this is probably most important. So how do you know you have it right? How do you know you got your shims, your rig tension, and all that the way you'd like it?
Yeah, it's pretty cool that, we spent all that time getting the pre-bend right and getting that wiggle. And what we really care about is how much the mast bend is going on when you're actually sailing. So the amount of pre-bend on shore isn't the end all. To me, it's the amount of overbend wrinkles you have. So a really good example of way too much bend in the mast, which causes those overbend wrinkles, is the left shot. And I remember this day I was sailing with John Baker and Sarah Paisley in Berlin, Ohio, and I don't know, maybe the party was too good the night before or something, but we put the rig up wrong and put the rig in the wrong holes, and it was way too tensioned. So instead of our usual 24, 25 on the forestay, came in at the end of the day and it was like 28 or something. And boy, you can see an awful lot of bend there. And so those overbend wrinkles radiating from the mast, that means the mast is bending past the luff curve and distorting. And we never want to sail with that many. We were slow that day. It was not good. And I don't know of any condition that it would be good in. So, and then on the right-hand side, you can see that those you still see some wrinkles there, but those are caused by the Cunningham. When we make the sails, we pull the bolt rope pretty hard. It's a polyester bolt rope, and it stretches. Pull it to about 40 pounds, and then sew it on. And then when you release it, it basically bungees up. Those are not overbend wrinkles. And I would say that mast is probably on the straight side. And so on the left side, if I was setting up my mast, I would take out shims or loosen my forestay, or maybe even shim in front. And then on the right one, I might put some shims behind to bend that or increase my forestay to get it just right. In the middle there, you got Brent Barberhan, and you see those overbend wrinkles going maybe halfway down the main. There's two windows there. There's a split in the window. You can't see the back one very well, but they end right by that baseball cap there. And I think that is the perfect spot to have the overbend wrinkles, and that's how I like it. So if it looks like that and the mast has that nice bounce to it that Greg Griffin showed on land, I'm pretty happy.
That's great. Matt, you mentioned Westport, and obviously that was kind of a light air regatta. And you mentioned how important it was, especially in the light air, like in that right-hand picture, to get the mast bend set right. And can you just mention that, and maybe you could even mention how painful it was until you got it right?
Yeah, I would just say it took us, I'm embarrassed to say this, 2 years to get to the point where we had our mast and main looking the way that Brent's did. And we actually did it in the middle of the regatta at Westport, and one shim made all the difference in the world from being able to make the mast and main set up the way we wanted. So that was is a big change.
That's great.
I want to add something here, is that you really do have to have the right conditions to make this look like this. If it's too windy or too light, then you won't get the right look. You need to be kind of like Brent is there. Better be sitting on the rail. not overpowered and not super light air either. So when you're doing your final check, you do have to wait for the right conditions so you're sure.
Gotcha. Ken, just because this is so important, Mike, you mentioned that you were slow that day on Berlin. When you're overbending that much, what was going on? What did you feel? Were you not going high, not going fast, or all of the above?
It was kind of all of the above. The main just got too flat and a little distorted. And with it, I couldn't really sheet in right. When the mast is too bent, the leach opens up and I couldn't really sheet in and get height. And at the same time, it was too flat to go accelerate and get fast forward too. The boat just felt all wrong doing that. I find if the mast is too straight, like maybe in that right one, or maybe I have a high mode that's really slow and I can't get the bow down and go fast at all. Just kind of a high and slow mode is kind of the symptom of the right. And if you're too bent, probably the symptom is you can't point at all because you can't get any leach tension to point off of. So that is another way to look at it. If you're having trouble pointing, maybe your mast is too bent, and if all you can do is point and go slow, you can't go fast. Maybe your mast is too straight.
That's good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Next slide, Wayno. So, Greg, now we're on the race course. We're maybe 10 minutes before the start. You're leaning down, or your jib trimmer's leaning down, looking up at the slide of the jib for one last check. What are you looking for here, and what's important?
Yeah, we're just trying to make sure that the leach of the jib is matching the main. You can see here in this picture that the lower part of the jib is kind of hooking back, and we want to make sure we're getting that pre-bend, which flattens out the lower part of the main. And we also want to see as we go up the leach that it's got a little open area there for the air to pass through, and so that we don't close off that slot.
Gotcha. Can you say that one more time? You mentioned the main has to be bent enough and have those overbend wrinkles because that's important for the slot too, right?
Yeah, and I think we can actually see that really well in the next picture if we go to that one.
Hey,
Okay.
before we do, I just want to say that the chat room's been open, and please start putting your questions in that we can talk about later or in another session. I'm sorry, Greg, go ahead.
No, that's great. Wayno, go, Greg.
Yeah.
Can you go back, Wayno?
Yeah, go back one sec here. So one more point here. You can see just in that middle part of the jib on the luff, you can see just a slight scallop there. And this would probably be too tight for a newer jib, but with this jib, you can see it's got a little more wear. And to get the draft in the right spot, they probably got the halyard on a little tighter. We'd probably be looking for a few more scallops otherwise.
Sorry.
That's all right. Go on to the next one. That's fine.
Oh, actually, Greg, can I ask you one other thing?
Yeah.
We didn't really rehearse this, but let me ask you what this jib is missing right here that you guys are going to talk about later.
Well, that telltale on the leach, right?
Yeah.
It's not up there. And if we go to the next one, you'll see. Is that what you were looking for, I hope?
Yeah, I just wanted you to mention that because it's so important.
Yeah. So if you look at this shot and we look at that top part of the leach of the jib, right by the 6 there, you can see the telltale, and it's kind of right at that stall point. And that shows us that we're trimmed in as tight as we can be for that condition. And that the jib is just inside the rail, and we're nice and tight. But more importantly, the point you were asking about on the mast bend, you can see the mast in front of the main here. You can see the mast all the way up almost to that draft stripe. And that pre-bend we work so hard for is creating a flat section in the lower third and forward third of the main, where you can actually create space for the air to pass through that slot, and that's helping open that slot up.
Good. That's good. Anything else you guys want to add there? Okay. So Mike, we've talked about the lead, we've talked about the jib halyard. Let's talk about the jib trim and what you kind of look at. We have the straws or the telltales, the guide up there with the straws, but what's your main guide that you use?
Yeah, so, I think we talked about that 10.5 inches off, having that zip tie. What we really care about is how much flow is going over the jib. And fortunately, we can use those telltales on the jib to tell us what that does. So in this, this is a video of John Yingling trimming the jib for Tom Hubble here. And I'm having him go through a range of jib trim to kind of point this out. And we put on a couple leech telltales to show that. But you can see there's a window there. And that's what that window's for, is you can look at those jib leech telltales. So when he pulls that in too much, you'll see that these telltales will stall. And that's not good. And so right there, they're stalled. And what you want to do when you get that is you want to just crack open the jib just a little bit until they flow again. And then you got it. You'll find that the stall is pretty digital. You'll pull it in just a little bit and a little bit more, and all of a sudden they'll go completely. And they'll be stalled. And so you want to ease it out again until it gets going. One thing good about those 10.5-inch ticklers, though, is that you can then see when it flows and see how far off the tickler is. So maybe in this, it's 11.5 inches, 1 inch off that zip tie, and that becomes repeatable. So when you trim it in, you can take a look at it and get awful close, and then you can fine tune it with these telltales.
So Mike, would you ever sail with them stalled? Like sometimes on the top telltale of the main, it's stalled. How about on these telltales on the jib?
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg. The main and the jib behave very differently. On the main, there's sort of a percentage of stall. If we're going for, say, 50%, we're going to get into this a little later, so you'll see what I'm talking about. But on the main, maybe it's going for 50%. It flows a little bit for a few seconds and then stalls for a few seconds, flows for a few seconds. On the jib, there's no time when I'd like to see that stalled. I'd like to see that flowing 100% of the time. This is an over-trim jib right here on purpose to prove a point. But I wouldn't want any percentages stall on the jib. On the flip side of that, though, is I do want it pretty much as tight as I can get it without it stalling. So that's why I like to over-trim it till it stalls a little and then crack it out a little bit till it gets going again. That's the perfect spot.
That's great.
Kind of cool that you have that really cool indicator to tell you if your flow is correct on your jib.
That's great. Super. Okay. Well, Greg, this next shot, we're going to get into, Wayne?
Got it.
Thanks. This next shot, we're going to talk about the gears. We always mention how we want to shift through them and make sure the boat's going in the height gear at the right time and we're footing at the right time. And these are some great shots that you guys have taken and are sailing in on Mission Bay this winter. So talk us through this, would you?
Yes. So Greg, this would be, your tight gear. You're as tight to the wind as you can be almost. The boat's nice and flat. You can see how tight the main is trimmed in the back. It's almost center line. The boom is very close to center line. And if you look sight up the leech, you can see that the top telltale is partially stalling. And this is not a mode you can stay in for a real long time, and you could only be in this mode in really flat water. This is kind of the lull of the medium wind, and so we're at kind of overdrive right here at the moment. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll see we've got a little more pressure on this boat. And back to that first one, if I could pick on anything here, there's not that much wind. We could actually have the boat a bit flatter and be even faster. The next picture, you can see Wayno's team is hiking well. The boat is nice and flat. The tiller's centered. The main's out a little bit more in this picture, and you can see the leech twisting off on the upper part of the main. The jib is also out just a click further. And what's really cool is you can see the forward crew, Wayne's daughter, Carly, looking ahead, and you can see that darker water in front of them. And this is just a great emphasis on just how important the teamwork is on a Thistle, to keep it going as fast as possible at all times. I imagine Carly's calling that puff right at this moment. And you can see Jerry in the middle, Wayne's brother, looking up, and he's either looking at the jib or at the how tight the vang is. And it doesn't look like they have a lot of vang on right now. This is probably 80% hike for the condition they're in. If I could pick on anything here, they could be hiking a little harder. Maybe if they were close to another boat, they might be in a little fuller hike, and then that would enable them to trim the main just a hair more.
You know, Greg Griffin, one of the things I like about that, you know, particularly that middle shot, you know, that team is fully engaged. You got the middle looking up at the sail, Wayne focused on the jib tails, and Carly, you can clearly see her looking forward at the puff coming. You know, it's a team effort, and all hands on deck is really helpful.
Yeah, that's a total divide and conquer moment, you know, and that's what has to happen a lot of the time. It takes the whole team to keep the boat at its optimum boat speed. So we move on, and now the puff is hit on that shot on the right, and you can see a lot of stuff is going on here. Look at the body position. They're all further hiked out. Jerry in the middle has pulled on the vang. You can see the boom's nice and bent. That's going to flatten the lower part of the main even more. And if you sight up the mast, you can see that the top of the mast, there's a line that I put in this photo, and you can see the top of the mast at the very top falling off some. That's one of the reasons we're so focused on getting our diamond tension correct, so that the top can fall off a little for a number of the different types of sails. It's basically a self-depowering situation when you're set up that way. I want to also add, look at the tiller again. All of these tillers are very centered, and this is just kind of a cycle you would go through. As the puffs come through, you're going to go from the middle, say, to the right picture in a big puff, and then as the puff dies off, the vang's got to come off, and you're eventually going to end up in the picture on the left. And that's the constant cycle you go through as the puffs come through.
That's a good point, Greg, that tiller down the center. In fact, that's going to be a good lead into this next shot for Mike, because Mike, you've always talked about balance, and no matter where you are in these shots on Mission Bay, you know, overpowered or in the height mode, like you say, the tiller, the boat's balanced. So Mike, that's always been your deal. That's your mantra. Talk about that, if you would.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of keeping the boat pretty flat. You can see the top picture there, you know, how straight the tiller is and how flat the boat looks. And one really telling thing, you can't see it from when you're on the boat, of course, but from behind, it's just so obvious that the wake here is right in the center of the transom. That boat is just really, really flat. And I really like that feeling if it's flat water. And then you see kind of an extreme on the lower left. If you heel up, even, I'm not sure what that is, but that's maybe 10 degrees or something. You know, how much that wake moves over to the side. The rudder's actually out of the water a little. And then look at my tiller. It's, you know, I'm pulling on it pretty hard there. You know, I think that's a break. You know, if you're pulling the tiller like that, it's, you know, it's just kind of going through the water and just causing nothing but drag. And I don't like that. You know, on the lower right, you see just a little bit of heel. And with that, just a little bit of helm. You know, that's okay too. I don't think you have to be absolutely flat like I am in the top picture. And it's particularly once some waves come, I like to see maybe kind of heel like it is on the right, or really big waves, maybe even a tiny bit more than that. But in no condition would I sail it how it looks on the left there.
Gotcha. You know, it's interesting. This guide that you have here, Mike, with the helm balance, I think is important in any kind of a boat. In fact, I just want to mention when we would do our speed testing with our college sailors, which we thought was so important, we would follow them just like this. And it was so critical that they kept the helm balanced. One time I was following one of our fastest guys, and I noticed he had weather helm on one side always, you know, like 6 inches of weather helm. And, you know, I was like, Jake, come on, balance the boat down. And then he'd tack. And on the other side, he had leeward helm. I said, geez, Jake, come on, trim the main harder, make the boat. Then we realized his tiller was bent. So you want to check that out. So Matt, let me ask you here, because you mentioned that this was an area in the Thistle that, you know, you found to be really important, and it took you a little bit to get comfortable with it, because I think you called it a dead stick or something like that, where the really light helm was hard to get used to, but was really important.
Yeah, and I think Mike has said it well already, but from my perspective, the other types of boats that I have sailed don't require a flat boat, and they actually have a little bit of a heel. And this is what, even to this day, to this last regatta, Midwinter's East, when I was sailing with Wayne, Wayne has to say to me relatively nicely 3 to 5 times each weather leg that we got to sail the boat flatter, even in the last race of the Midwinter. So it is a dead stick. Sometimes it feels good to have a little bit of weather helm, but you got to keep the boat flat.
Well, only 3 to 5 times. I get a lot more than that.
It's more than that. He's just not admitting it. So.
Yeah.
That was the relatively nice part.
Yeah, right.
There is you give a good point. This doesn't, especially particularly if you're used to sailing a boat that does sail with heel, it doesn't necessarily feel right. So, you're feeling the helm, you have to get used to a new feel. So the fast feel to me is very, very neutral. And as soon as I'm pulling on that helm, I feel like it's, my feel is just wrong now. And that's not true with some other boats. So I think it's something on the Thistle everybody's just got to get really comfortable with.
It's really to make better use of your very nice foiled centerboard.
Yep. So, Mike, now we get into our first video. I think you shot this, and it talks a bit about balance, steering, keeping the boat balanced. And one thing you might touch on here, if I might ask you, I don't know if this is exactly the place we're going to talk about it, but obviously we're playing the main in and out here in this video. But you might just touch on, does the jib trimmer adjust the jib for you, or do you kind of keep that in more or less a locked position?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is Mission Bay, Jonathan Posner and team. And this was in that practice day we were following along. He was doing a nice job. It was pretty puffy. It was pretty tricky to keep the boat flat, and did a pretty good job. And you can see that even when he heeled a lot, there was that little wake only went a little bit off to the side. So I'd call that in the acceptable range. But a couple of things I'd like to point out here, and then I'll get to your question too, Greg, which is, I think in flatter water, you really can steer quite a bit. You don't want to jerk the helm around. But if you get a puff, you can head up a little, your parent wind goes aft, and maybe you have to ease the main a little bit, and you do it, and then you pull it right back in and lull. You can bear off and keep the boat going. And I think that's a great way to sail the boat in flat water. But to your question on the jib, even though we had a round of puffs and lulls here, I would expect that it wasn't enough to change the jib in this video. They'd kind of set it and leave it to that kind of spot where we know the jib telltale is flowing. And until you ease the main quite a bit, I wouldn't be easing that jib. So everything's a combination to keep the boat flat of hiking and steering and main. And the flatter the water is, the more you can steer and less main you have to do.
Gotcha. Hey, Wayno, we're in good shape time-wise here. Are there any appropriate questions that we ought to click into now real quick before we get into this last video that kind of tells it all?
Yeah, we are in good shape on time. There's one from Steve Lavender. I think that's relative to what relevant to what we're talking about right now. Is how much heel are you going with in light air?
I could take that one. I think that to me, as long as the boat can handle, as long as the sail can hold wind, I want to sail really flat. So if it's really light and, gravity hasn't taken over the main yet, it's not, which is pretty light when that happens. So if it's 3 knots, like a Cedar Point National seems to be 4 out of 5 days, I think you can still sail the boat super flat. And I only heel it when it just gets crazy, like, 2 knots and below. And at that point, I do that for, just to keep the sail from falling in on itself. You got to use gravity to keep some shape in it. I don't know. Do you guys do anything different than that? Greg Griffin, what do you do?
Actually, I've been unfortunate enough to get to sail in that 2 to 3 knot range a lot at a regatta called the Dixie. And so we do exactly what you're saying, where you heel the boat over to get the sail, the main to fill out and the jib to fill out. But the other thing we do is we'll change that heel if there's a big set of waves coming or something, which we get a lot of those on Lake Allatoona, is we'll really heel the boat a whole lot and put the rail down in the water to change the shape of the boat as we go through those huge waves sometimes. We'll also slide our weight back. But again, the main key is just getting the sails to take shape, because if the mast is straight up and down, they're just going to hang straight down. So we may heel as much as 15 or 20 degrees when we're sailing and nothing like that.
Right. So it's flat, and the only exception to that is crazy light air, where the sail just kind of flops in on itself. Probably should be heading to the dock and that stuff anyway, right? But or when you get just some crazy wave that's just going to slam the boat, and that's just temporary when that happens.
And that, by the way, ties into bringing in the chop. The question from Adam Young was specifically that. It says, talk more about letting the boat heel up in big chop.
And that's coming up.
Yeah, actually, we have some video of
We
that.
do heel a little more in chop. I think what Greg was referring to there was some crazy waves, probably motorboat waves and light air. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a little different than steady chop. But
Hey,
you know,
guys,
we will sail flatter. Like, so here we are in Mission Bay. We do want to sail pretty much as flat as we can with, virtually no waves in this condition. And we will be looking at some waves in a moment here. So.
hey, can I ask you guys something? We've
Yeah.
talked a little bit about light air here. We've talked about where we trim the main upwind and medium, breeze. In that really ugly light stuff, and you guys pointed out how you only heel the boat for the gravity to shake the sails for you. How far out are you easing the main? Like from the tiller hole, how far off to leeward are you easing it? A lot of us sail in light air, and I think sometimes we over ease the main maybe, and maybe heel a little bit too much. So this is good stuff.
I think that, we like to talk about how much flow the top leech tail has, and as long as I can ease it enough in light air to get that flowing some, I'm happy. I do think there's a limit to that. Sometimes when it's just crazy light, if you ease it and you still see the top leech tail stalled, and you use it a little more, and the top of the main starts to luff a little bit, essentially it's so twisted that, it's the front of the main starts to luff, then I'm not going to get flow. It's just not worth easing at that point. So that's a great question. Greg, what do you do for that?
We might even, pull the Traveler to weather in that super twisty stuff we're trying to achieve. So we can get the bottom to give us our height, but then you've got such wind shear in those real light wind conditions. It's such a different angle up high. You do want that twist. So that might be something we might try in that.
Yeah. I got to throw in another question. I don't want to take us on a wholly different track, but I got to ask one. This one is from Larry Liggett, so you might guess where this is headed, right? So Larry says, I recall tuning my mast about a decade ago. Are you saying I should check it this year?
I'm surprised he was only a decade for Larry. I'm impressed that you did it a decade ago. So, yes, you should, Larry. Actually, we got it for you. Don't worry about it. We'll take it next time we see you.
And before we go to the next slide, Dan Fiend wants to know what beer I'm drinking. It's an amber, Dan. So, ready for the next slide, next video?
Yeah, this is where it all happens. This is a great shot of Team Korshak sailing in St. Pete. Mike's going to kick it off, but this video goes for almost 3 minutes, and we're going to see all kinds of great stuff here with steering, balance, main trim, telltales, tacks, the whole bit. And the three guys are just going to talk through it, and I think we're going to learn a lot here. And we can go backwards and forwards too, so this will be good stuff. Mike, why don't you kick it off?
Yeah, we had just talked about how to sail in flat water on Mission Bay, and this is a good example of a pretty well sailed boat in waves. You can see even from the side they're heeled up a little more, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And the bow is going up and down through the waves. They're actually pretty big waves, you can see from the bow, and they're doing a really nice job of sailing through that and keeping the boat. It just looks like they're not fighting it, and I like to see that look where the boat just, it seems like they're not fighting the hobby horsing, and they're not fighting the tiller. What do you see in that, Greg?
Well, your first thing that jumps out right there is a great shot of the overbend wrinkles.
Yeah, maybe you
really
could
good.
freeze it there, Wayne, for a sec. We could talk about that.
So that's going to set up the lower part of the main just like we want. You also see the out hauls on pretty tight. We haven't talked a lot about the out haul because we don't change it a whole lot unless we're, you know, in a condition where we're trying to get enough power to get that third person on the rail maybe. But a lot of conditions we've been talking about, you're pretty much max out haul on most of the sails we sail. But yeah, you see those overbend wrinkles and they're coming back nicely. Craig's got the main trim fairly tightly on the sport tack. So I think we can roll it from there unless you got something to add there, Mike.
Well, I think too, notice that Lauren's back a bit from the shroud, right? Like they're not, we got to move back in the waves a little bit too. So, and they're nice and close together so just keeps the boat so it can kind of pop through the waves without fighting it too much. Right. So Wayne, go ahead, roll it again, Wayne. I think, this is a contrast to what we saw in the Mission Bay, and you can see that they're heeled a little more, and I think that's okay. If you don't, you kind of slap the bow a bit more, especially on these steeper waves. And I think that's pretty important. I think it highlights too that we talked about in Mission Bay and flat water that, Jonathan there was steering quite a bit. He'd get a puff and he'd head up, and sure, he had to play the main a little bit to keep the boat flat, but he tried to do a lot with steering. And, I think here in the chop, he doesn't have that luxury. If he heads up too much, he's just going to slam into a wave. So as it gets wavier, he's playing the main a lot more to keep the boat going, and end up steering maybe some, like I think he bore off there to get through a lull, but he's steering more for the waves and not trying to oversteer, doing a lot with the main. Look how twisted that main is right there. So I think that's just a difference in style.
Yeah, Mike, you can see the subtle body movement too. They're just so smooth going through there and it looks effortless. And that's that balance you're referring to. And the tiller hasn't had to move a whole lot to achieve that. And in that lull, they'll just let their body weight bring the bow down by heeling a little flatter or maybe even to weather just a little bit on the backside there.
That's right. They're not fighting it. I think if you feel like you're fighting your boat, you're absolutely doing something wrong. You got to let out the main a little or depower, maybe put some more shims in, do something to get the boat under control.
If I can jump in, what I would say with Craig and his team are doing a lot of good things. On this tack, you can just see how they all stayed on that old high side, new low side at just the perfect time. Right there, Craig's got the main out at pretty good level. And even when you see this first tack, you'll see all three of them stay on the high side at least till they're past, a click or two past head to wind. Trust me, that's what that did.
Yeah, there's a couple of good things in that tack. So I think Wayne's getting to it now, but
I'm trying.
Once he gets that going again, you're going to see that they ease out the main after both sails after the tack, and so the jibs ease and the mains ease. And boy, he's sailing fast here, isn't he? Look at that.
He's getting to the tack real soon, man.
Yeah, right. Boy, he's got
operator error going on right here.
Or tack in a breeze. Sir.
Yeah, so
here we go. Ready? We're getting ready to tack.
So we're gonna have Wayne freeze it here on the right after the tack, and look at their trim. I think this is really important. So look at stop it right there. Perfect time to stop it. Look how easy that jib is, nice and twisted. The mains ease, and so what I think happens here is that I like the trimmer to pull the jib into a preset spot that's eased quite a bit, and then the driver is easing the main to whatever exit angle they happen to get to. They're trying to. It's hard to get the exit angle exactly right. So if you're a little low, maybe it's a little more eased. If you're a little high, maybe a little tighter. But then both sails are out and twisted here. Look at how twisted that main is. And they're coming up to the rail. They're starting to flatten. And then only once they start getting accelerated again do they start bringing it in. And what we like to do is, Dan trims in the jib, and he's waiting for me to feel like I'm up to speed before he trims in. So what he'll do is he'll wait he just listens for my ratchet. And when he hears that click, he clicks his in.
Yeah, I think also, Mike, what we were talking about earlier is that Craig has the vang off. And if the vang is on when you tack like this and you ease the main just to keep the boat under balance, you're really going into the worst part of the backwind from the jib. So easing that vang before attack in this type of breeze. So, I mean, look at right there, Craig's end of the boom is probably 2.5 feet from the Traveler. So
Yeah.
it's good to have the twist up high and the boom go up instead of out.
You know, the vang does two things. You know, I think you're right. It helps it twist here for accelerating out of the tack. And you're right. Look how high that boom is. That tells you the vang's off. But also the vang is a depower tool for us. That rocking mast is really, really affected a lot by the boom. So when you pull the vang on, you're not just pulling it down, but you're jamming it into the mast, and that causes the lower part of the mast to bend. And you can see here, they're starting to pull it back on and it gets flat. But in general, we're looking at the vang as a depower tool. You get some pressure, you want to depower or you accelerate and you feel up to speed, you get the vang back on. If you need power either to get through some bad waves or you're got a little light spot, you got to ease that vang off. And, you know, we pull it on super tight and heavy air, and you have to let it off when we tack then because I don't want to break anything, but it really does this as well. It kind of twists the main and powers it up for accelerating out of the tack.
It's a great point, Mike. This is really a tale of two tacks, you know, with the wave condition here. And they're set up much twistier on the hard tack directly into the waves here on starboard. And on port, they were able to trim much tighter. You can see how far out. He's not going to get the main as tight as he did on port tack at all, just because he needs to keep the power in the sail plan and the twist to make it easy to steer through these waves. The other side, the port side tack, was much easier.
You know, can I make a comment, you guys? And just to reiterate, excuse me, what you said, Mike, earlier about when you come out of the tack to land in that sweet spot, you know, the main has to be trimmed to match the balance of the jib, like you said. And I think that's something that you can practice before the race and do 5 or 6 or 10 tacks and really pay attention to what your helm's feeling like when you come out of the tack. And when the sails fill, if you have a lot of helm, then you know you got to ease your main out a little bit. And if you feel like the boat is wanting to heel over and bear off, then you need to trim the main in a little bit more when you come out. And practicing that before the race will give you a real good idea of just how much ease you're going to go through.
You know, Matt pointed out when we were looking at this earlier today that, you know, look how long it takes to get up to speed in the chop. I think you, Matt, what'd you say? I think you actually kind of counted boat lengths. And what'd you say it was?
Yeah, it's somewhere between 3 and 4 boat lengths after the tack is when Craig actually and his crew pull the sails in at exactly the same time. So he was feeling when the boat was at speed after attack, but it just shows whether you apply that for, you know, getting going at the start or after attack in this type of breeze and waves. You got to give it a few boat lengths till you trim in.
And I think if you do that too soon, what you're going to do is stall everything out and get some helm, and you're not going to get balance, and it'll be, you know, it's going to take you 5 or 6 boat lengths to get up to speed instead of 3 or 4. So I think that's something to be really cautious of. And I think, you know, if you were in flat water, maybe that would happen in just 2 boat lengths. But either way, you got to feel it and know when it happens and coordinate your efforts with your team to get those sails in at the same time.
There's a question that's come up here a couple times talking about travelers. A shout out to Amanda Osteen. She said, where'd she go? She said, can you talk about setting your traveler? How do you know if it's out too much? Where were your travelers set on that insanely windy day in Sandpoint?
Well, I guess I'll take that one. So we haven't seen a condition in these videos or talked about a condition where we would mess with the traveler. You've noticed it's been pretty much centerline the whole time because we've needed as much power. We weren't going to address the heavy air sailing in this presentation. But at Sandpoint, there were times when we had the traveler, what I, instead of playing the traveler, what I do on our boat is let the traveler down an appropriate amount based on how much I'm going to have to open up the slot to keep the boat moving forward. So that may be halfway, or it could be 3/4 of the way down. And then we're going to play the main sheet and vang sheet from there. And of course, the jib's going to have to go out quite a bit when you've got your traveler down that far. But we have intentionally not really tackled the heavy air in this presentation yet.
No, but it's a good question. And I think, you know, we mostly keep the traveler in the middle, and it's kind of the extremes we might move it. So in crazy light air, like Greg talked about before, a traveler up to help with getting twist, because it's so hard to get enough twists in light air. And then as it gets heavier, I think the only people that play the traveler are people that use the Proctor main. It's a little different cut, more open leach, and you can kind of get away with that. And they basically lock the main sheet and play the traveler. But I don't do that. I let the traveler down, just like Greg was saying, which is if it gets crazy windy, I'll put it down a little and then I'll leave it and I'll play the main sheet and arrange from there.
Yeah, thanks. There's a bunch of heavy air questions here, and like you said, we had intended to come back and we'll address heavy air in another session. One question that's going to take us in a little bit different direction, but I think it's interesting. So someone asked if they, a young college person still wants to go sailing, wants to do well, and their boat's a bit mushy, and they're wondering if you have any recommendations for them.
You can always put new stringers in them. You know, you can take a pretty flexible boat and restring it fairly inexpensively and add good stiffness. The other key is the rails. If the rails are delaminating and they're not solid, the boat's going to be mushy. So those are kind of the two things I think of. How about you guys?
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, I've watched some pretty old boats get restored and do pretty well. I think Nicole Frinderfrock's a great example of that. 17 something, right? An old glass boat and some new stringers and, you know, beefing up the tank joints and putting some new rails on, and that thing's a solid boat. It was doing great. Midwinter's west this year, Midwinter's east this year was pretty breezy and wavy, and that boat was right up there in the top group. So I think you can take an old boat and make it good by doing those kinds of things to it. I'm certainly not an expert at that, but I've seen it done successfully.
Yeah. You know, one thing, Wayno, that I always thought was important is to make sure the stanchions were stiff and locked in place well, because when the rig's loaded up and you're trimming the main hard and you're vanging hard, you know, forget the rig tension. If those settle at all, if they're soft and the grate will bend, you lose rig tension and obviously the ability to maintain the jib shape and bend the mast.
Yeah. Well, one thing I would say is it's impressive, having been gone from the class for a number of years and coming back in the last 5, is the number of the mid-number 30-year-old glass boats that are now competitive, right? It's like, yeah, there's the brand new boats and all that, the newer boats, the 4000 series, but you still see the 3700s, the 3600s, and 3800 boats that are going really fast, which I think is one reason the class, you know, we had more boats at Nationals this year than at West Coast Nationals, I think, in history. The registration at Midwinter's East and Midwinter's West was up, and then 125 boats sold out like in less than a month for Nationals. Tells you a lot of good things, right? So what I'm noticing as we are at time, and we have another video and just a little bit more to go through. So I think wondering if we should move on.
Okay. Well, this next one is for Greg, and this is a video he took of Lauren Hoffman in St. Pete, and it's a great shot of him going through all the gears. And why don't you take it away, Greg?
Yeah, I slid up behind these guys and they were kind of taking it easy, not really hiking a whole lot. And you can see as they look back and then they start hiking really hard, you can actually see the pressure in the main start to bend the mast even more, and the overbend wrinkles start to become very prominent. And that's a great effort, but you got to be careful when you really start loading up the rig. You could break a hiking strap. And these guys did an incredible job. Look, 2 guys went out of the boat. You'll see in just a second here. The forward crew actually was able to ease the main. And it looks like Lauren broke the hiking stick too, I think. No, it's still there. But they did a great job saving this. And it was just incredible that they didn't capsize on top of us as well. My driver of the boat, Chris Klotz, also did a good job of slowing down and not running into them.
And I have to say, the Ford crew's doing a great job of demonstrating COVID isolation technique with the face mask, right?
For sure.
All right. Greg, any last thoughts before I close this up?
No, it's great, Wayno. Thanks.
Hey, thanks for putting this on, Wayne, and hosting. Doing a great job of moderating, Greg.
Yeah.
So a couple things. If we can get you emailed, if you're on the Yahoo groups or if you're already on the Nationals email list, so if you got an email about this, we're going to send out a couple pictures for you. And what we're going to ask you to do is just what you noticed, because one thing that it was really interesting for me to watch these four go through their process is really get locked in on what they notice. And I kept saying to them is, what I'm noticing is what you notice about what goes fast. So the invitation for you will be to take these pictures and just notice what you notice. And here's a good example of one. What do you notice? What's good? What's bad? And then hopefully we'll bring that for next time and go through that. If you have questions and comments, please send them to Greg at gregfishersailing.com, and that's where we'll collect all of these. Again, Greg at gregfishersailing.com, and we'll use those for next time. We hope to in the future, and again, partly it's going to depend on the questions we get from everybody, and there's a lot of good ones in here already. But we definitely want to talk about downwind and then also teamwork and crew work. And then lastly, really thank you so much for showing up. This was a gas to put together. Thanks for staying safe and healthy. All right, to Mike, Matt, Greg, and Greg, I'm not kidding you when I tell you that this was the amount of effort and care that went into this was nothing short of impressive. So, and they kept saying, well, shouldn't we meet again? Shouldn't we do this? Whatever. And finally, we had to say, look, no more. It's really good. I also want to thank Howard Menlovitz for the Zoom so we could have more than 100 people because that was the limit of my license, right? And then the rest of it, thanks. It was really fun to do this. So again, everybody, thank you. Take care. And